to cleanse the planet of the human race. So we'll all become extinct.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2024 horror Arcadian. The film is directed by Benjamin Brewer and it stars Nicolas Cage, Jaden Martell, Maxwell Jenkins and Sadie Soverell. Right, the film is set in kind of like an apocalyptic future, a future where, the world has kind of, pretty much come to the end due to its pollution, all this kind of stuff. And what survivors there are left kind of have to scavenge and make do with what they can find, because at night there are these creatures that come out on the hunt, and if they find you, they will kill you. So Nicolas Cage has got his two teenage sons, and they have to kind of stay alive by foraging during the day, trying to find whatever they can to survive, while one of his sons, Thomas, is making connections at a local farm. Right. What are my thoughts on Arcadian? Well, I don't know whether you know. If you follow my channel, you will know that I am a big fan of Nicolas Cage. One of my favourite actors. I've really been enjoying his revival these last few years. He's done some fantastic films. It's great to see him kind of get back on the big screen and get a little bit of recognition again. One of the finest actors, I think, of this generation. So I've been quite looking forward to seeing this, and perfectly honest, I'm quite looking forward to see any Nicolas Cage film that generally comes out. But I'm not going to lie, I came away from this one a little disappointed. And that's not... This is not what I would describe as a bad film. It's just unoriginal and fairly dull, I suppose. Now, the whole concept, the idea that, there's some kind of like apocalyptic future where pollution has kind of killed so many, and, Nicolas Cage is trying to survive with his two teenage sons. And then on a night time, there's these creatures that come out on the hunt. It's not a new concept, it's almost I Am Legend-like, but on a much smaller scale and not as interesting. The dynamics here, kind of, you've really just got Nicolas Cage and his two teenage sons. So the dynamics of going out during the day, seeing what you can find to kind of survive on, and then coming back before it gets dark, so that you can keep yourself safe from these creatures. That kind of only kind of keeps your interest up for so long. And then you've got this local farm with another family on it, and the only reason that Thomas really goes there to help them is because he's got his eye on their teenage daughter, Charlotte, who they've kind of got a thing for each other. But if it's so dangerous, again, I'm presuming that these families have lived like this for years, these avoiding these creatures, kind of making their homesteads as safe as they can on a night to keep these creatures out, etc., etc. And then over the space of like a couple of days that this film shows us, it all goes tits up. One of the sons comes back from the farm and he ends up falling down a ditch, and then, his dad's got to go, Nicolas Cage are going to go and find him and try and survive through the night. And then, the next day, they discover both at his farm and the other farm that these creatures that in a lot of ways kind of they kind of look like massive moles. They kind of have that kind of look and idea about them. They kind of burrow up from the ground up. Well, what happens later in the film is kind of what you would expect to happen with these things kind of burrowing up through the ground. But they've only just... They didn't think this was going to happen. It is one of those films that if you overthink it kind of thing, or if you kind of, put a bit too much thought into it, you're kind of like, well, that doesn't make sense. It all kind of falls apart. Now, most films, if they pull off the magic trick, you don't focus so much on it. But because this film doesn't have an awful lot else to offer, you can't help but focus on the negatives that this film presents, sort of thing. Um, it, the fact that there are aspects of it that don't make a great deal of sense. The fact that there are probably a number of ways that these creatures could, get in, and it doesn't make sense that they just kind of scratch on one door. It's only a farmhouse at the end of the day. And it pains me to say it, Nicolas Cage has very little to do in this film. If you're hoping for one of those, crazed, manic Nicolas Cage performances, you're going to be desperately disappointed. Now, he is a fine actor. We all know this. And Nicolas Cage knows when to dial it up and when to dial it down, depending on the film that he's in. This is definitely a dialed down performance. It's quite a subdued performance. He's just playing a father trying to protect his two teenage sons. However, there comes a point in this film where Nicolas Cage's character is injured, and the film then becomes all about his two teenage sons. And this happens about maybe halfway through, a little bit over. So there's a big chunk of the film where Nicolas Cage is barely in it, and it is literally just about his two teenage sons at that point, trying to put their differences aside and survive. So even if you're a huge Nicolas Cage fan, again, this is what I'm saying, he's not given an awful lot to do here in this film. And this is a horror, and it's not frightening. I didn't find it frightening. And at times it's too dark for its own good. You really struggle at times to see what's going on. And that sometimes can work in a horror's favour, but you've still got to deliver on some aspect. If you're going to go down the real dark avenue and be really mysterious and hide things in the darkness, you still got to kind of give a hint of it. And at times I found the film just too dark, and it didn't really deliver. There's a couple of jump scares here and there, and then we have the design of these creatures. No idea what to make of them, really. At times they looked decent, and then at other times they looked appalling. And I couldn't quite put my hat on which one it was overall. And the way they behaved, was just very, very strange. So yeah, it's not as if you're like, wow, look at that creature design, that's cool. That always helps movies like this, but I can't honestly say I did like the creature design here in this film. And then, there's very little in the way of explanation as to how we've kind of got to where we are in this world. The only real explanation that we get is where one of his sons, Thomas, plays a game with that girl he likes, Charlotte, where they've got to, is it 10 seconds or something like that? They've got to explain in 10 seconds, how the world got to the state it's in, which was just so, quite a lazy way, I think, of trying to explaining how the world has got to where it's got to, sort of thing. And he doesn't explain a lot anyway, so I'm kind of at the thinking, I think this probably would have been a better film if we'd have seen it at the beginning of, the apocalypse almost, rather than 15 years after. Because we do see, there's a scene at the beginning of the film where you see Nicolas Cage at the beginning of all this, kind of trying to survive, and then he's got these two babies, his two sons, and then it jumps forward 15 years, so his two sons have grown up, his twins. I was more interested in seeing that bit at the beginning, more of that, rather than what we got 15 years later. I think the first bit would have been more interesting than the bit that we got that just felt so familiar, telling a story that we've kind of seen before and done better, and we don't even have the lure of Nicolas Cage really to keep us interested in the film, because he's not, in my opinion, he's not in it enough, and it's, like I say, it's quite a dialed down performance. So while I don't think this is a bad film, the production values of a very strong standard, it looks quite bleak, and, there's a couple of moments here and there that kind of might give you a little bit of a jump scare here and there. It's a pretty tame and weak horror film overall. And probably for me, his most disappointing film maybe of the last 2 or 3 years. It just didn't click for me, this one, unfortunately. So, never mind. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the review. I will, of course, be back with plenty more reviews and content on the channel very, very soon.